All right. So, in preparation for this deep dive, you sent over some really fascinating research
Hmm.
on AIs in medical devices.
Yeah,
And I gotta say, it's pretty exciting stuff, but
yeah.
also a little bit unnerving to think that algorithms could be making decisions about our health.
It definitely raises some big questions.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And actually, the article jumps right into that.
Okay,
It starts with a debate about the very term artificial intelligence.
okay.
Some experts are arguing that it's become such a broad term that we need to be more precise
Mm-hmm.
about what we mean when we say a medical device is using AI.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like AI has an identity crisis.
Yeah, you could say that.
Interesting. So how does the article suggest we approach this?
Well, it really emphasizes focusing on the specific purpose of the AI in a medical device.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than getting hung up on whether something is truly intelligent,
Right.
we should be looking at what it's actually doing and how that impacts regulations.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's get practical. What are some examples of how AI is being used in medical devices right now?
Oh, well, we're seeing it everywhere, from software that analyzes medical images
Uh-huh.
to help diagnose diseases to algorithms that are embedded in pacemakers that can adjust their settings in real time.
Wow.
There are even apps that use AI to predict things like blood sugar levels.
It's incredible the range of things that AI can do.
It is.
I imagine that regulating all of that must get pretty complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
The article mentioned some issues there.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is that different regulatory bodies around the world,
Mm-hmm.
like the FDA here in the US and the EU, have different definitions and classifications for AI medical devices.
Oh, so something that is considered an AI-powered device in one country
Exactly.
might not be in another.
That's right.
That seems like it could create a lot of
It
confusion for
does.
companies who are trying to develop and market these technologies.
Definitely. And the article gives a really interesting example of this. A blood sugar monitoring app that uses AI to predict future glucose levels
Mm-hmm.
could actually be regulated differently in the US versus Europe, even though it's serving the same purpose.
Wait, really? Why would that be?
Because different regulators might prioritize different aspects.
Okay.
For example, some regulators might be more focused on the potential risks of the AI making incorrect predictions,
Right.
while others might be more focused on the potential benefits of, like, personalized treatment.
So even though the technology is the same, the approach to regulation could vary?
Exactly.
That's got to be tricky for developers.
It really does.
Yeah, it raises a big question, I think.
Yeah.
If we want to see these life-saving AI technologies reach their full potential,
Hmm.
do we need more global agreement on how to regulate them?
It's a big question.
Yeah, and speaking of potential risks, the article really emphasizes the need for careful risk assessment when it comes to AI in healthcare.
Right. And for good reason. I mean, we're dealing with people's health here.
Of course, yeah.
So the stakes are high. The IMDRF,
Okay.
which is kind of like a global forum for medical device
What's
regulators,
that?
has laid out a framework for assessing the risks of AI medical devices based on two main factors:
Okay.
the function of the software and the severity of the disease it addresses.
So an AI that is helping to diagnose a life-threatening condition would obviously be considered much higher risk
Of course.
than, say, an AI that is just, tracking your steps or something like that.
Exactly. And that's why regulation has to be so careful.
Right.
It needs to be stringent enough to ensure safety, but also flexible enough to keep up with this rapidly evolving field.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is.
To make things even more complex, we also have this whole issue of black box algorithms.
Right.
The ones where we don't even fully understand how they reach their conclusions.
Right. That lack of transparency is a major concern.
Yeah.
If an AI is making a recommendation about your health,
Uh-huh.
you and your doctor want to know how it arrived at that decision.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. It's like blindly following a GPS without understanding the route.
Yeah,
You might get to your destination, but it's a lot less reassuring.
that's a great analogy. And the article goes on to discuss how this lack of transparency is a big challenge
Right. Yeah.
for regulators and experts
Mm-hmm.
who are trying to figure out how to evaluate and approve these AI-powered devices.
So what are they doing about it? Are there any solutions on the horizon?
Well, there are a few promising initiatives.
Okay.
The article mentions groups like Consort A
Mm-hmm.
and Spirit AI,
Okay.
which are essentially developing checklists and guidelines to ensure that AI research in healthcare is conducted in a transparent and rigorous way.
Okay, so those are good steps, but the article also mentions that there's still no single universally accepted pathway
Right.
for evaluating AI. Why is that?
Because the field is moving so incredibly fast that it's hard for regulation to keep up.
I see.
Think about it. New AI algorithms and applications are emerging all the time, and the technology itself is constantly evolving.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly.
Wow. So how are different parts of the world approaching this regulatory challenge?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore in more detail a little later in our deep
All
dive.
right, sounds good. Stay with us.
You mentioned different approaches to regulation.
Yeah.
So let's look at those.
Okay.
The European Union, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is known for taking a pretty cautious approach.
Okay.
They've already implemented things like the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR,
Yeah, I've heard of that.
you've probably heard of,
Yeah.
and they're working on a whole new AI Act,
Wow.
specifically to address the risks of AI in various sectors, including healthcare.
So the EU is definitely being proactive.
Yeah, they are.
What about other parts of the world? Is the US taking a similar approach?
Not exactly.
Okay.
The FDA, which is the main regulatory body for medical devices in the
Uh,
U.S., has historically taken a bit more of a wait-and-see approach.
Interesting.
They're certainly aware of the potential risks of AI,
Uh-huh.
but they're also mindful of not stifling innovation.
So it's a balancing act between safety and progress.
Right.
But how do they actually go about evaluating these AI medical devices?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Traditional methods of evaluating medical devices
Mm-hmm.
often involve randomized controlled trials,
Right.
where you compare a new treatment or device to an existing one.
Yeah.
But with AI, it's not always that simple.
Why is that?
Because AI systems are constantly learning and evolving even
Oh.
after they've been deployed.
Okay.
So the data you collect in a controlled trial
Yeah.
might not accurately reflect how the AI will perform in the real world, where it's constantly being exposed to new information.
That makes sense. So how do you evaluate something that's always changing?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's something that regulators and researchers are grappling with right now.
I bet.
One approach is to focus more on real-world data,
Okay.
looking at how these AI devices actually perform in clinical settings with diverse patient populations.
So instead of just relying on controlled trials, you're also gathering evidence from the field.
Exactly. It's a much more dynamic approach to evaluation,
Yeah.
but it's necessary to keep up with the rapid pace of AI development.
Makes sense. This all sounds incredibly complex.
It is.
But is anyone focusing on making sure that these devices are beneficial to patients
Yes.
and not just technically impressive?
Absolutely. Clinical evaluation is a critical part of the regulatory process for any medical device,
Okay.
including AI-powered ones. And it's all about demonstrating that a device is not only safe,
Right.
but also effective in achieving its intended medical purpose.
So it's not enough to just show that the AI algorithms work as intended.
Right.
You also have to prove that they actually make a positive difference for patients.
Exactly. And this is where things can get a little tricky.
Okay.
Traditional methods for clinical evaluation, which often rely on randomized controlled trials,
Yeah.
may not always be suitable for AI systems that are constantly learning and evolving.
Right. We were just talking about that.
Exactly.
So what are some of the ideas being explored to address this challenge?
Well, one approach is to focus on real-world data,
Okay.
which can provide insights into how AI devices perform in actual clinical practice.
So instead of relying solely on those controlled trials,
Right.
we could also look at how these devices are being used
Exactly.
and what outcomes they're producing in real patient populations.
Yeah, another key aspect of clinical evaluation for AI
Mm-hmm.
is ensuring that the data used to train the algorithms is representative of the intended patient population.
That makes sense because if an AI is only trained on data from a specific demographic,
Right.
it might not perform as well when applied to patients from different backgrounds
Exactly.
or with different medical histories.
Yeah, and that's why it's crucial to consider factors like diversity and inclusivity
Of course.
when evaluating AI medical devices.
So it's about moving beyond just the technical validation.
Yeah.
And ensuring that these devices are truly beneficial for all patients.
Exactly.
But what happens once an AI medical device gets the green light? Is that the end of the story?
Not at all. In fact, that's just the beginning of another crucial phase,
Okay.
post-market surveillance.
Post-market surveillance. Okay, what does that involve?
It means that even after an AI medical device has been approved
Mm-hmm.
and is being used by patients,
Yeah.
it's still being monitored closely. Manufacturers are required to collect data
Okay.
on how the device is performing any safety issues that arise
Uh-huh.
and whether it's truly effective in real-world settings.
So it's like an ongoing safety check.
Exactly, and this is especially important for AI systems,
Right.
which, as we discussed earlier, can continue to learn and evolve
Yeah.
even after they've been deployed.
Okay.
So post-market surveillance helps to ensure that any unexpected problems or biases are caught early and addressed.
It makes sense. You essentially keeping an eye on these AI devices
You are.
to make sure they're behaving themselves out in the real world.
That's a good way to put it. And this surveillance data can also be used to improve the AI systems over time,
Oh, okay.
making them even safer and more effective.
So it's like a continuous feedback loop,
It is.
constantly refining the technology.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, isn't this all about finding that right balance
It is.
between innovation and regulation?
Absolutely. Oh, on one hand, we want to encourage the development of these incredible new AI technologies
Huh.
that have the potential to revolutionize healthcare. But on the other hand, we need to be responsible
Right.
and make sure they're safe and effective for patients.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is.
And I actually noticed that the article didn't really go into how patients feel about all of this.
That's a great point.
Do we know if people are comfortable with the idea of AI making decisions about their health?
That's a really good question, and it's something that the article doesn't really address.
Yeah.
It focuses mainly on the regulatory and technical aspects,
Hmm.
but patient perspectives are clearly a crucial part of this conversation.
Do we have any insight into how clinicians feel about it? I mean,
Yeah.
are they worried about being replaced by robots?
That's a common concern,
Yeah.
and it's understandable, but the reality is that AI is much more likely to augment the work of clinicians,
Okay.
not replace them entirely.
So it's more about collaboration than competition.
Exactly. Think of it like this AI can help clinicians process vast amounts of data,
Mm-hmm.
identify patterns,
Yeah.
and make more informed decisions.
Okay.
This frees up clinicians to spend more time with their patients,
Right.
focusing on the human aspects of care.
That sounds like a win-win.
It does.
But how do we get there? How do we ensure that AI is used in a way that benefits both patients and clinicians?
Well, education is a key part of it.
Okay.
We need to make sure that clinicians are trained on how to use these AI tools effectively and ethically,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to educate patients about the potential benefits and limitations of AI in healthcare
Right.
so they can make informed decisions.
So it's about empowering both patients and clinicians to navigate this new landscape.
Precisely. And it's also about fostering a culture of open dialogue and collaboration.
Okay.
We need to have conversations about the ethical implications of AI in healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
the potential biases that can arise,
Yeah.
and how to address those
It
challenges.
sounds like a lot of work,
It is.
but ultimately this is all about harnessing the power of AI
Yeah.
to improve healthcare for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
The field of AI in healthcare is constantly evolving.
Yeah, it is.
So it's crucial to stay informed and engaged as new developments emerge.
It's a fascinating and rapidly changing field.
It is.
Any final thoughts or key takeaways you want to leave our listener with?
I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of this is that, we need to be careful about making sweeping generalizations about AI.
Okay.
It's not a single thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole collection of different technologies and techniques.
So we shouldn't just blindly accept or reject AI as a whole.
Exactly. We need to evaluate each application on its own merits,
Okay.
looking at how it works, what data it's trained on,
Right.
and, what its limitations are. Transparency is absolutely key.
So it's about looking beyond the hype and really understanding what's going on under the hood.
Yeah, precisely. And it's also about recognizing that AI is a tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a replacement for human judgment empathy
Right.
or the doctor-patient relationship.
So you're not saying robots are going to take over the hospitals, are you?
Not quite. AI has the potential to make healthcare more efficient, more personalized, and more accessible.
Okay.
But it needs to be implemented in a way that complements and enhances human expertise.
So it's not about AI versus humans. It's about AI working alongside humans to improve healthcare.
Exactly, and I think that's a really important message to convey.
Yeah, for sure. But, with all this potential, there is also a lot of potential pitfalls as well.
Right.
How do we ensure that AI is used responsibly in healthcare?
One crucial piece is education.
Okay.
We need to make sure that clinicians are trained on how to use these AI tools effectively and ethically.
Yeah.
And we also need to educate patients about the potential benefits and limitations of AI in healthcare so they can make informed decisions.
So it's about empowering both patients and clinicians to navigate this new landscape.
Precisely. And it's also about fostering a culture of open dialogue and collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have conversations about the ethical implications of AI in healthcare
Yeah.
and, how to address those challenges. We need to bring diverse voices to the table.
Right.
Clinicians, patients, ethicists, researchers.
It really does feel like we're just at the beginning of this journey, and there's still so much to learn and figure out.
I agree, but I'm optimistic. I think if we approach AI in healthcare thoughtfully and responsibly, it has the potential to truly transform lives for the better.
That's a great note to end on. This has been a fascinating deep dive, and I hope our listeners have found it as thought-provoking as I have.
It's been a pleasure.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us. We encourage you to check out the full article we discussed today and continue exploring this complex and rapidly evolving field. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. SLR.